I remember that night, so clearly, like the air itself was holding its breath. We were all gathered around the long oak table in my father's dining room, the one he always said belonged to real men of business. I sat across from him, trying to look relaxed, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the room, but all I could taste was the bitterness of his laughter echoing in my head. He leaned back in his chair, glass of wine in hand, and looked straight at me with that smirk I'd known my entire life. "You're too dumb for business, Sloane," he chuckled, shaking his head like I was some little girl who'd just told a silly joke. Everyone else at the table laughed along, except me. They always laughed when he cut me down. It was easier to laugh than to stand up to him. I kept my eyes on him, calm, quiet, but inside my chest felt like fire. I had heard those words so many times that they barely stung anymore. Dumb, not serious. Better suited for hobbies. He had a whole arsenal of insults ready whenever I even mentioned work or ambition. And yet, that night, something in me shifted. His voice didn't make me shrink anymore. It made me steady. I folded my napkin slowly, carefully, so no one would see my fingers trembling. There was a weight in my purse, sitting by my chair, that gave me strength. A single folder tucked neatly inside, its edges sharp against the leather. I knew what it held, and I knew tonight would be the night I finally let it see the light. My father raised his glass again and turned to my brother, Rowan, grinning proudly. "Now here's the real deal-maker," he boomed, clinking glasses with him. "Rowan's going to take us further than I ever dreamed. He's got the brains, the charm, the vision, not like—" He paused and glanced back at me, his grin widening. "Not like your sister here, who still thinks she can play pretend in the big leagues." The table chuckled again. Forks scraped plates. A cousin coughed awkwardly. But no one said a word in my defense. I looked around, letting my eyes meet each face. People who had known me since childhood. People who'd watched me be overlooked year after year, and all I saw were polite smiles and lowered gazes. I took a slow breath, straightened my back, and pressed my hands against the table. I didn't speak. Not yet. Silence was stronger than words in that moment. My father kept grinning. Rowan laughed softly beside him, but eventually, even their voices quieted. The air grew heavy. I lifted my chin and reached for my purse, sliding it closer. The leather brushed against the tablecloth with a soft scrape, and every eye turned toward me. My father raised a brow, amused, completely unaware that everything he thought he knew about me was about to change forever. Growing up, it felt like my entire life was measured against my brother, Rowan. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When he brought home a B on a test, Dad called him brilliant under pressure. When I brought home an A, Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. "That's expected," he'd say, like my hard work was nothing more than breathing. Every birthday toast, every holiday dinner, it was the same story. Dad would brag about Rowan's natural talent for business, how he had an eye for numbers, how he was born to take over the family name. And me? I was introduced as the creative one, or worse, the dreamer. That word always stung, because to him, a dreamer meant someone who couldn't be taken seriously. I still remember one Christmas when Rowan was 16. Dad gave him a leather briefcase, heavy and polished, with his initials engraved on the side. Everyone clapped, saying it was perfect for the future CEO. That same night, Dad handed me a sketchbook and said, "This is more your speed." He didn't mean it as a gift of encouragement. He meant it as a reminder of where he thought I belonged, on the sidelines, doodling, while Rowan handled the real world. But what no one knew was that I was paying attention. I watched every business conversation, every deal Dad bragged about, every mistake he tried to hide. I listened when he thought I wasn't listening. While Rowan got all the praise, I started to build something of my own, piece by piece, in silence. I took jobs nobody cared about, internships at small firms, assistant work that felt beneath me. But I treated them like classrooms. I stayed late, asked questions, studied the way contracts were written, the way deals were closed. At night, when the house was quiet, I sat under the glow of my desk lamp, reading finance books I bought secondhand, scribbling notes into that same sketchbook Dad once mocked. Only now, it was filled with balance sheets and strategy maps instead of drawings. I wasn't completely alone. There were two people who believed in me when my own family didn't. In the park, my first real mentor saw something in me when she caught me double-checking her figures at a job I was only supposed to file papers for. Instead of being annoyed, she pulled me aside and said, "You've got an eye for this. Don't waste." And then there was Arya Stanton, a lawyer with sharp instincts, who never treated me like a joke. She taught me how to read contracts the way some people read novels, finding the hidden twists and traps. With their guidance, I started making small moves, investments here, shares there. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just steady steps forward, while Dad kept telling me to find a hobby, and Rowan soaked in the spotlight. They thought I was invisible. And maybe I was. But that invisibility was my greatest weapon, because while they weren't looking, I was building something far bigger than any of them ever imagined. Dinner that night should have been like any other, but I could feel something building even before the first glass of wine was poured. My father had a way of turning a normal family meal into a stage, and all of us were his unwilling audience. The clinking of silverware, the low hum of small talk. It was all just background noise to the performance I knew was coming. He started off harmless enough, bragging about Rowan's latest deal at his firm. "The boy's a natural," Dad said proudly, his voice carrying across the table. "Always knows the right move. That's the kind of instinct you can't teach." Everyone smiled, nodded, even clapped their hands against the table lightly, like he just announced Rowan had won a Nobel Prize. Then, as always, his eyes drifted to me, his grin widened, and I felt my chest tighten because I already knew what was coming. He never missed an opportunity. "And then there's Sloane," he said, chuckling, like just saying my name was the punchline to some private joke. "Still trying to figure out what she's good at. But hey, maybe she'll surprise us one day." The table broke into nervous laughter. My cousin Sarah dropped her eyes to her plate. My aunt stirred her wine, pretending not to notice the sting in my father's word. I sat still, my fork resting against the edge of my plate, my hand clenched in my lap so tight my nails pressed crescents into my skin. Rowan leaned back, smirking at me in that easy way he always did when Dad handed him the spotlight. "Don't be too hard on her, Dad," he said, pretending to defend me while twisting the knife. "Not everyone's cut out for the business world. Some people just aren't wired that way." More laughter. My father slapped Rowan on the back, delighted by his wit. "That's my boy," he said proudly. "Sharp as ever. He's right, Sloane. Maybe it's time to stop chasing things you'll never catch. Not everyone is built to run with the big dogs." The words hit me harder than they should have. Even after all these years of hearing the same refrain, my throat tightened. My cheeks burned, but I kept my face calm. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Inside, though, it was like a storm was tearing through me. Every laugh, every dismissive glance, it all piled up like stones on my chest. I looked around the table, searching for even a flicker of support, but there was nothing. Just polite smiles, eyes cast down, people too afraid to challenge my father. In that moment, I realized I was truly on my own. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, like the walls themselves were leaning in. My father took another sip of his wine. Still smiling, still so sure he was right about me. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay quiet any longer. His laughter had gone too far. This time I would answer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam my hands against the table. I just sat up straighter, slid my chair back slowly, and reached for my purse. The leather brushed against the tablecloth with a sound that made a few heads turn. My father arched an eyebrow, smirking like he thought I was about to storm off in a huff. He had no idea. I opened the purse and pulled out the folder I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. My fingers rested on the smooth cover for a second, steadying myself. Then I placed it on the table, right in the middle of the plates and glasses, and flipped it open. The sound of the clasp snapping echoed louder than it should have. "What's this supposed to be?" my father asked, his tone dripping with amusement. He leaned forward, wineglass in hand, confident this was another one of my silly attempts at proving myself. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I slid the first page toward him, a signed contract, the ink still dark and bold. "It's the purchase agreement," I said quietly, my voice calm but cutting through the chatter. "For Sterling and Lane." The name dropped like a bomb. The room went silent. Sterling and Lane wasn't just some company, it was a major player, one my father had tried to court for years without success. His smirk faltered, just slightly, as his eyes darted over the page. This is a joke," he said, laughing nervous. But his laugh didn't carry the same confidence anymore. He passed the paper to Rowan, who froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "It's not a joke," I said, sliding out more documents. "Board approval letters, certificates of ownership, everything notarized and sealed. I own controlling shares. As of last month, Sterling and Lane is mine." Whispers broke out around the table. My cousin gasped, my aunt covered her mouth, and even Rowan's cocky grin drained away as he flipped through the paper. My father's face reddened as he snatched the folder back, scanning the signatures, the dates, the details. His voice wavered when he tried to dismiss it. You don't understand what you're holding. You can't possibly." "I understand it better than you think," I cut in. "I've spent years studying every line, every clause. I made the right moves when no one was paying attention. While you laughed, while you ignored me. I could feel Lena's words in the back of my mind. Arya's steady encouragement, all those late nights and quiet sacrifices leading to this moment. My father looked smaller somehow, his authority slipping with every second. For the first time, I wasn't the girl he mocked. I wasn't the dreamer he dismissed. I was the woman who had just taken the prize he could never claim. And as I slid the final document across the table, I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Tell me again, Dad. Who's too dumb for business?" The silence after my words felt heavier than the walls around us. My father just stared at me, his mouth open but no sound coming out. His hand gripped his glass so tightly, I thought it might shatter. Rowan kept flipping through the pages like he was searching for a loophole, some sign that it was fake, but there wasn't one. Every page was stamped, signed, sealed. There was no denying it. Finally, my father spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of its usual thunder. "You went behind my back," he muttered, shaking his head. "You think this makes you clever? You think this makes you one of us?" I leaned forward, my voice calm but steady. "No, it doesn't make me one of you. It makes me better than you ever gave me credit for." Rowan let out a weak laugh, trying to regain control of the moment. "You can't just waltz in here and think owning some shares makes you a leader. You don't know what it takes." "I own more than shares," I cut him off, sliding the final certificate across the table. "I own the company. The board voted. They chose me to lead." That landed like a hammer. Rowan's words dried up instantly. His fork clinked against his plate as he set it down, his face pale. My father leaned back slowly, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on me. I could see the storm brewing in him, the disbelief, the wounded pride. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time in my life, Grant Whitaker, the man who always had the last word, was speechless. The family around us shifted uncomfortably, their whispers filling the air. My aunt whispered to Sarah, "She really did it," as if saying it out loud made it more real. A cousin leaned in closer, eyes wide with something that looked like admiration. The balance in the room was shifting, and everyone could feel it. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to gloat. I just looked straight at my father and spoke evenly. "You spent my whole life telling me I wasn't enough, that I wasn't smart enough, strong enough, or ruthless enough to succeed. But while you underestimated me, I was building something you couldn't touch. And now, here I am." He slammed his glass down, the sound sharp against the table. "You think this is victory? You think you've beaten me?" His voice cracked, betraying the fear underneath his anger. I held his gaze. "No, Dad. This isn't about beating you. It's about proving I never needed your approval to stand on my own." For a moment, the entire table froze. caught between the man they'd always followed and the daughter they'd always dismissed. And then I saw it, the flicker in their eyes, the realization that the power he once held was slipping. My father's smile, the one he wore like armor, was gone. What remained was silence, raw and bitter, and the weight of a truth he could no longer deny. The room felt different after that. It wasn't just quiet, it was as if the air itself had shifted. My father sat there, stone-faced, his lips pressed together, his pride cracking in front of everyone. For once, he couldn't find a joke or a cruel remark to throw at me. His silence was louder than any insult he'd ever spoken. I gathered the papers back into the folder, slow and deliberate, and placed it neatly in front of me. I wasn't shaking anymore. The fear, the anger, the years of being dismissed, it was gone. What I felt now was calm, powerful, like I'd finally stepped into the place I was always meant to stand. Rowan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, still trying to piece together what had just happened. He avoided my eyes, but I caught the look on his face. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It wasn't mockery. It was something closer to respect or maybe jealousy. Either way, it was the first time he couldn't laugh at me. I didn't need to rub it in. I didn't need to gloat. Instead, I looked around the table at the people who had witnessed every belittling moment of my life, and I spoke calmly. I didn't do this to embarrass anyone. I didn't do it for revenge, even if that's what it feels like right now. I did it because I deserve a seat at this table, not as a joke, not as the dreamer, as someone who's worked hard, sacrificed, and earned her place. No one spoke. My words lingered in the heavy air. My aunt finally nodded. Just once, almost like she'd been waiting years to see this moment. I turned my eyes back to my father. "You don't have to like it," I said softly. "You don't even have to admit you were wrong, but you'll never call me a failure again. Not after tonight." For a split second, I thought I saw it. The beginning of an apology forming on his lips. His eyes softened, his jaw unclenched, but whatever words he might have found died before they left his mouth. He looked away instead, swallowing hard, choosing silence over surrender. That was enough for me. I didn't need his apology anymore. I didn't need his approval. I had already won. I closed the folder, tucked it back into my purse, and leaned back in my chair. My heartbeat was steady, my hands still. For the first time in my life, I felt equal in that room. No more than equal. I felt untouchable. Dinner went on in awkward silence after that, but I barely noticed. My father stayed quiet, my brother stayed humbled, and the rest of the family stole glances at me, like they were seeing me for the very first time. And me, I just sat there, calm and unshaken, a small smile on my lips. I didn't need to say another word. I had already said everything that mattered. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, please subscribe, like, and share it. Helps this community grow. I'd love to hear from you too. Have you ever proved someone wrong who doubted you? Share your story in the comments. I read everyone. More stories of revenge, drama, and life lessons are coming soon. Stay connected and remember, you're stronger than you think.